Part 1: The Unraveling Alliance. In March 2024, a legal bombshell exploded across Silicon Valley when Elon Musk filed a sweeping lawsuit against OpenAI, the artificial intelligence company he had co-founded years earlier. The case revealed a story far more complicated than simple business competition. It was a tale of idealism betrayed, promises abandoned, and a non-profit organization that had quietly transformed into a multi-billion-dollar commercial enterprise. At the heart of this conflict lay fundamental questions about who controls artificial intelligence technology and whether corporations pursuing profit can be trusted to prioritize human welfare. OpenAI began in 2015 as a non-profit organization, a mission-driven venture established with noble intentions. The founding documents were explicit. The organization would develop artificial general intelligence in ways that benefited humanity. The charter declared that profit would never be the primary objective. Safety, ethics, and broad benefit to society would guide every decision. When Elon Musk helped establish the organization and served on its board, he believed he was participating in something transformative. He envisioned a counterbalance to other AI development efforts that might pursue powerful technology without adequate safeguards. The early years seemed to validate this vision. OpenAI conducted serious research into AI safety, alignment challenges, and the potential risks of developing systems more intelligent than humans. The organization published papers, shared findings with the academic community, and appeared genuinely committed to responsible innovation. But beneath the surface, tensions were building. As the company developed increasingly powerful models, the commercial potential became impossible to ignore. In 2019, OpenAI established a capped profit subsidiary structure, a hybrid arrangement that would allow investors to earn returns while maintaining the non-profit's control. This was presented as a compromise, a way to fund ambitious research without abandoning core principles. Then came ChatGPT. When OpenAI released this language model to the public in late 2022, it became a global sensation almost instantly. Millions of people interacted with an AI system that could answer questions, write essays, code software, and engage in remarkably human-like conversations. The technology demonstrated capabilities that exceeded what most experts believe possible. It also generated enormous commercial interest. Tech companies, venture capitalists, and corporate executives suddenly saw artificial intelligence not as a distant possibility, but as an immediate opportunity for massive profit. Microsoft invested billions of dollars into OpenAI, gaining exclusive rights to deploy the technology for commercial purposes. The company's valuation skyrocketed. By 2024, OpenAI's estimated market value exceeded $850 billion, a staggering figure that transformed the organization from a research institution into one of the most valuable private companies in the world. This trajectory violated the original nonprofit charter so fundamentally that it seemed almost impossible that the transformation had occurred with minimal public discussion or scrutiny. Elon Musk, observing this evolution from outside the organization, grew increasingly troubled. He watched as a nonprofit dedicated to preventing concentrated AI power had itself become concentrated and commercially driven. The board that was supposed to serve the public interest now served investor returns. The transparency that had characterized early research had given way to proprietary secrecy. The safety considerations that supposedly guided development competed openly with profit maximization. In his testimony, Musk would describe a betrayal of the mission he had helped create. He would detail conversations with OpenAI's leadership where commercial interests repeatedly trumped safety concerns. He would present evidence suggesting that the organization had abandoned fundamental commitments about how advanced AI systems would be developed and deployed. Most provocatively, he would argue that OpenAI's transformation illustrated a broader problem in artificial intelligence development: the absence of meaningful external oversight or accountability mechanisms. The lawsuit became more than one businessman's complaint against a former collaborator. It represented a fundamental challenge to how the most powerful AI systems on Earth would be created and controlled. Before we continue with what Musk revealed in his testimony and how OpenAI responded to these accusations, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. The courtroom where Musk's testimony unfolded was packed with journalists, lawyers, and industry observers who understood they were witnessing a pivotal moment in technology history. When Musk took the stand in late March 2024, his demeanor was calculated and methodical despite the explosive nature of his allegations. He presented himself not as a disgruntled founder seeking revenge, but as someone compelled by conscience to expose what he viewed as a systematic abandonment of principles. His legal team had prepared meticulously, assembling documents, emails, and recorded conversations that would form the evidentiary backbone of the case. Musk's testimony focused initially on the early conversations he had with Sam Altman and other OpenAI leaders about the organization's direction. He described meetings where he raised concerns about the nonprofit structure being undermined by commercial pressures. According to Musk's account, he had explicitly warned that allowing a for-profit subsidiary to dominate decision-making would inevitably corrupt the organization's mission. He claimed that when he voiced these concerns, leadership acknowledged the risks but proceeded anyway, prioritizing access to capital over adherence to founding principles. One particularly significant moment in his testimony involved Musk's discussion of specific safety protocols that OpenAI had apparently deprioritized. He described instances where safety teams recommended limiting certain capabilities or delaying model releases pending additional testing, but these recommendations were overridden by product and business development teams eager to maintain competitive advantage. Musk presented this pattern as evidence that profit considerations had become the primary decision-making driver, exactly contrary to the nonprofit's charter. The testimony also addressed the relationship between OpenAI and Microsoft. Musk argued that Microsoft's massive investments had created financial dependencies that made the nonprofit's board essentially powerless to resist commercial imperatives. When a company becomes dependent on a single major investor for continued operations, he contended, genuine independent governance becomes impossible. The board could theoretically refuse Microsoft-driven demands, but doing so would threaten the organization's survival, creating an impossible choice between principle and viability. Musk's lawyers introduced communication showing that OpenAI had marketed its services and models to corporations and governments without disclosing limitations, risks, or the extent to which the technology remained experimental. He characterized this as misleading customers and the public about the maturity and reliability of systems that would ultimately influence consequential decisions. This wasn't merely a business dispute over market positioning, his testimony implied, but a matter of public trust and safety. The cross-examination that followed was intense and searching. OpenAI's legal team challenged Musk's characterization of meetings and conversations, suggesting he had misinterpreted business decisions as betrayals of principle when they actually represented reasonable adaptations to changing circumstances. They argued that developing advanced AI required enormous capital investment, and that the nonprofit structure, while idealistic, was simply incompatible with the scale of resources needed for cutting-edge research. They presented their own timeline, showing how board decisions reflected careful deliberation rather than reckless profit-seeking. The opposing counsel also questioned whether Musk himself had truly been surprised by commercial developments. They presented evidence suggesting that during his time on OpenAI's board, he had participated in discussions about funding mechanisms and business models. They implied that his current objections conveniently emerged only after he left the organization and began developing his own AI company, Zai, creating a clear conflict of interest. This line of questioning attempted to reframe the lawsuit not as principled whistleblowing, but as competitive positioning disguised in ideological language. Throughout these exchanges, the fundamental tension remained unresolved. Whether OpenAI's trajectory represented an inevitable and reasonable response to technological and financial realities, or whether it constituted a betrayal of explicitly stated commitments made to co-founders, early employees, and the broader public, the testimony revealed that both interpretations could be supported by selective reading of the same evidence. This ambiguity would define the case's ultimate significance, as observers attempted to determine whether the lawsuit would transform AI development practices or remain merely one contentious chapter in Silicon Valley's competitive history. The broader implications of Musk's lawsuit extended far beyond the courtroom, raising questions that would ripple through the entire technology industry. If a court determined that OpenAI had violated its founding commitments, it would establish legal precedent, suggesting that other organizations claiming nonprofit or public interest status could be held accountable for abandoning those missions. This prospect alarmed venture capitalists and technology executives who had begun positioning their own companies within structures that claimed idealistic objectives while pursuing aggressive commercial strategies. Regulatory bodies worldwide watch the proceedings with particular interest. The European Union's emerging AI governance framework explicitly referenced the need for transparency and accountability from large AI developers. The outcome of Musk's case could either vindicate regulatory skepticism about self-governance or suggest that existing legal mechanisms could address misconduct within the industry. American legislators, meanwhile, remained divided on whether the lawsuit demonstrated the need for stronger oversight or whether it showed that existing contract and fiduciary law could handle disputes without new regulation. The financial dimensions of the case proved equally compelling. OpenAI's valuation had soared from the nonprofit's initial capitalization to the $852 billion figure through successive funding rounds. The question of whether those vast valuations reflected genuine technological achievement or inflated expectations driven by FOMO in venture capital markets became increasingly relevant. If OpenAI had misrepresented its safety practices or the maturity of its systems, investors who purchased equity during funding rounds might have grounds for their own legal actions. The lawsuit in this sense potentially threatened not just OpenAI's reputation, but the financial interests of every venture capital firm and technology company that had bet on the AI revolution. OpenAI's response evolved throughout the trial proceedings. The organization released a lengthy statement defending its governance structure and safety practices, arguing that commercial success and safety considerations were not mutually exclusive. The company contended that it had actually invested more substantially in safety research than most technology companies invest in anything, and that Musk's allegations misrepresented both the timeline and the substance of internal discussions. OpenAI's leadership suggested that the lawsuit reflected Musk's disappointment at being excluded from subsequent decisions rather than genuine safety concerns. The organization also highlighted its published research and external partnerships with academic institutions focused on AI safety. They argued that transparency about limitations and risks had become increasingly standard practice across their communications with customers and regulators. They noted that they had proactively engaged with governments developing AI policy and had advocated for regulatory frameworks that would establish baseline safety and transparency requirements for the entire industry. Public opinion regarding the case remained divided along lines that often reflected broader worldviews about technology and capitalism. Those skeptical of Silicon Valley's intentions saw Musk's allegations as confirmation that profit inevitably corrupts noble intentions. Those more optimistic about market dynamics viewed the lawsuit as an overreaction from someone disappointed by decisions that, while commercially driven, were ultimately reasonable. Technology workers and researchers found themselves grappling with uncomfortable questions about whether their own participation in commercial AI development involved complicity with systems that prioritize profit over safety. The case exposed the fundamental challenge of governing artificial intelligence development in an era of massive capital requirements and extraordinary potential impact. The nonprofit structure that OpenAI had originally adopted reflected a genuine attempt to navigate this tension, suggesting that AI development of tremendous consequence should occur within institutional frameworks designed to prioritize public welfare. Yet, the organization's own trajectory demonstrated the practical difficulty of maintaining such commitments when technological advancement requires billions of dollars and organizational decisions must satisfy investors, employees, and commercial partners simultaneously. As the trial continued into summer 2024, the most significant revelation was perhaps not any single piece of testimony or evidence, but rather the visibility it brought to questions that technology companies had successfully kept largely private. The litigation forced public examination of boardroom conversations, safety protocols, and strategic decisions that would normally remain confidential. This transparency itself, regardless of the eventual legal outcome, shifted expectations about accountability and disclosure within the artificial intelligence industry. Organizations would henceforth operate knowing that such scrutiny was possible, and that claiming nonprofit or public interest status created heightened obligations to demonstrate that those claims reflected reality.